And just to be able to kind of balance out, I meant to bring the articles this morning. I'll bring them next week. But something just to balance out our obsession right now and taking over with the election and so forth. Did anyone see the USA Today? I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday morning. I think it was Tuesday morning, USA Today. A couple of articles in that. One is an article by the inventors, the creators of Siri, who are now working on a new version of this. It's just about ready to roll out. It's called Viv, V-I-V. And what this does, whereas you can ask Siri anything, Siri answers back and all this other stuff. This new one tracks what you ask so that it can begin to anticipate what you may want and make recommendations to you of what you would want based upon your habits. It is able to catalog and keep literally millions of bits of information about an individual. And the title of the article is The Big Brain in the Sky. Interesting. In the same newspaper article, not the same article, but in the same newspaper, there is a Japanese gentleman who has created a robot that he can speak through. In other words, he can have the robot who looks like him at a place, and he can do the presentation or carry on a conversation through the robot from where he is somewhere else. Reminded me of Revelation 13, where the beast has an image, and the image speaks. Now, is this the Antichrist image? No, probably not. But the foundation is laid for what is soon going to roll out in this world. And I will bring those articles so you can see them, and I'll read and quote it to you. But just to kind of balance out, we are all in a dither about what's going on in our land today. There's a whole lot bigger things that's happening in the providence of God for the fulfillment of prophecy. And it would do us well as we look at everything else to really concentrate on those things, to kind of bring the balance and give us wisdom as we move in to the deeper parts of the last days. Don't think we're near the 7 years yet, but we're pretty close. We're pretty close.
Can I ask you a question, Billy?
Sure.
How does current events differ from history? Severity, situation. I know technology's changed, but is this not just a repeat of what man has seen over the last 2,000 years?
Sure, it is. It is, and if you remember,
why is this more significant?
Yeah, if you remember from our study of Revelation, when we looked at the opening of the seals, those first 4 seals, famine, plague, I'm not giving them into order, but wars, deception, those things, they've always been around. Been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And what we noted then, as a graphic, is that they continue to intensify as we get closer. So there was a lot going on 2,000 years ago that's just like what's happening now. If you look at some of the history channels, some of the science channels, sometimes they'll talk about ancient discoveries. And it's just amazing what people were doing 2,000 years ago that we think we've just discovered within the last 100 years. I mean, it's amazing. So what has happened then was more local, more confined, and as we have progressed through the centuries, the same things have just simply intensified. When we reach Revelation 8, you see an intensification of everything that is going on by the hand of God at that point. to where, you know, it is totally global, it is totally consuming, it is totally, you know, affecting everyone.
I.e. World War I, World War II. Do you think the Jews thought that the end was there? Well, for them
Probably.
it was.
Yeah, in World War II, for 6 million of them it was the end. And I think that produced a mindset in the Jewish mind, one, that it should never happen again. We hear that a lot. But also, you know, just where is God in all of this? Of course, they asked that at the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. They asked it in 586 BC with the fall of Jerusalem with Nebuchadnezzar, you know. So, you know, we've seen all of these things, but the great thing about Revelation is that it tells us, it talks to us about the intensifying of all these things. And you know, I think that's the biggest difference between thousands of years ago and today. Essentially the same thing. People are lying, people are deceiving, people are killing, people are starving. You know, they were then, they are now, they will continue to be, and it will only intensify in its magnitude. We're probably going to go back through the Revelation, maybe in another year or so. We'll go back and look at that, and I'll have all my notes that are available so you can see what we're going to cover when we get to it this time, you know, and we can have maybe even a deeper and better discussion. It'll probably take 2 years to go through it next time instead of a year and a half, so, you know, and that's okay. Yeah, well, you know,
That's what I was thinking.
yeah. I anticipated that comment coming up somewhere in this discussion.
This week we're in chapter so-and-so, verse so-and-so.
Yeah.
Heard what Obama said, well, right here it is.
Yeah. But Trump's going to fix that, whatever it is.
Oh,
you know.
sure.
Yeah, he's going to fix that.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, I just heard a little bit, so I don't really know if I'm speaking right or not. They're talking about Congress had decided that ISIS was committing genocide against Christians.
Finally.
Finally.
Yes.
And they're all about that, but yet the White House, I understand, is saying, no, that ain't so. And,
Yeah.
That's
I wonder why that is it because they're also killing some innocent Muslims too? You know, women and children or
Who
whatever.
knows? I mean, you know.
It's kind of odd. I mean, you know, just talking about World War II and the Jews, and you think about Idi Amin in Africa, you know, the genocide over there. I mean,
We knew about the Jews in World War II and did nothing about it until.
Japanese Kurds.
so, I mean, how long, you know, since how long do we have to wait before we see some happen? But it's obvious it's going to not happen during the Bush president's term.
Yeah.
And if we don't elect somebody over in Hillary, we'll continue on that thing.
What about that fifth DOJ while we had it?
I'm sorry.
The fifth DOJ, Supreme Court Justice,
Oh.
number 5.
Yeah.
That's a pivotal point in our life. One
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Big things are happening. But in mentioning those articles in the paper, we can get caught up in the moment of what's happening in our country, which is serious. I'm not minimizing that in the least. But at the same time, as a believer, realize that there are much bigger items and issues that are taking place, that Satan is running and moving, and politics is just one of the veins that he uses to bring people, this world, to a place to where he can produce an antichrist and false prophet. So it's, you know, we are living, as Paul said, in difficult, troublesome, perilous times. And those will continue regardless who gets the presidency. And this world's at a place to where it's going to continue to move. And when we get to Habakkuk and study the book of Habakkuk, there's a place you can get to where you can't stop it. God decides it's not going to stop. That shook Habakkuk up when the Lord told him that. And Jeremiah was much the same way. Jeremiah was a prophet who said, you may as well give up. Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldeans, are going to win. You may as well give up. Now, if we were to say that out loud in our country today, we would probably suffer some of the same fate Jeremiah did. Somebody throw us in a pit somewhere.
People are saying that.
And it could very well be true. I don't know that it's true. But in the movement of God, things seem to be getting to a place to where it is moving at a pace to where you really feel that this is God allowing and pushing, because it's headed to the point. And nothing is going to stop it. Nothing is going to stop it. And that's good news. I don't sound like it, I know that. Yeah, tribulation's coming. But also the millennium is coming. Christ is coming back. We are going to have a resurrected body or a raptured body, one of the two. If we're dead, resurrected. If we're here, raptured, transformed body. So the end of the story is good news. All of this is the darkness before the dawn. But that will be a new day when that day dawns. And it will surely come. Just as surely as the darkness is coming, that day and dawn is coming. Wonderful. So, it just works right in with Job, doesn't it? Job had a hard time, and here we are in the midst of it. So we're continuing to look at Job. Any other questions on that before, if you have something that's kind of burning in your mind, we'll look at it before we move into Job. So we started last week talking about the particulars of God's response, and we looked at the Lord's approach to Job in chapter 38, when instead of just really being comforting and saying, well, Job, I'm so sorry all this has happened to you, Job, the Lord said, listen, stand up. I got something to say to you. Because Job had spent all these chapters saying, I need to talk to God. If I could just talk to God. Okay, the Lord said, okay, stand up. We're going to talk. So we looked at that last week, but another particular that really stands out in the Lord's responses to Job is in chapter 38, verse 7 and verses, excuse me, allergies, verse 7 and verses 31 through 33. So, reading from the New International Version, 38:7. The Lord is asking Job about creation. That's what he's talking about in this chapter. And he says in verse 7, while the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. Then verses 31 through 33 of this chapter. Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with his cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? And these passages are interesting. And you kind of wonder, is the writer speaking just poetically here? Or was he quoting God, noting that the stars sing? What do you think? Do it this way. Do stars sing? How you like that for a question? Only in this class would you ever come up with somebody that as a teacher that do stars sing? Yeah, it depends on how much alcohol you got in you, whether they seem to be moving at one point when you get a lot of that in you.
Scientifically, they're listening.
Yeah.
They're listening to the silence.
Yeah. There's an article that I ran across that was quoted from the Wall Street Journal. This is back in October 29, 2010, by a gentleman named Kevin Spack, S-P-A-K, Spack. that NASA has discovered a group of massive red stars that are actually humming to themselves. The planet-hunting Kepler Space Telescope recently spotted sound waves emanating from the stars, the Wall Street Journal reports. NASA recorded the tune and played it recently at a press conference in Denmark. It is a giant red concert, quote unquote, says the astronomer who made the recording. They have many different frequencies and overtones. The sound waves can help astronomers determine the size, density, age, and structure of the stars. In much the same way seismic waves reveal details about Earth's interior. To measure the size of a star, we essentially measure the tone of these musical notes, says one astronomer. The sound waves travel down into the star and bring information back up to the surface of the star that Kepler can see as flickering. So it's very interesting. Do stars sing? Scientists say yes. They're humming to themselves. There's musical notes. Sir? Yeah. And that's an excellent point. It could well be that if we were spiritually attuned, and probably at the resurrection of our bodies, when we are given a spiritual body that is able to listen to spiritual tune and hear those frequencies, it could well be that we'll hear the stars singing praises to the Creator. So as we look at this, some of the particulars in Job, people would attack this before. Do stars sing? Well, he's just speaking poetically. Or once again, that's just a bunch of myths that's in the Bible. No. Scientific foundation, as if we needed it, is there to say, yes, there are musical notes emanating from the stars. And what the Scriptures already stated is that if we could hear it, God could hear it. If we could hear it, we might very well hear stars singing. Maybe one of the songs is Amazing Grace. Who knows? But I think it's just interesting as we look at what the Lord brought out to Job in this section, that, it's not just fantastic thinking. There is ground and there is truth in what the Lord is saying to Job to help him realize, Job, there's a whole lot going on in this creation that you really don't understand, along with the fact of why you are suffering. That's the basic point the Lord is bringing out. And we see some of the similar thing in verses 31 through 33 with the constellations. Perhaps that's spelled right, I don't know. When the Lord asked, can you bind Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? And it's an interesting passage. And some commentators on this have taken this to imply that God was accepting the power of astrology in the zodiac signs. However, what God was doing in talking to Job is simply using language that Job could understand. Carry it up, it's faithful. That Job would understand. He had seen, he had heard, he had been around, and he understood this. Now, when the Lord asked him about this and says, can you bring forth the constellations in their season? Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? The Pleiades is, according to the website Earth and Sky, and you probably have heard that if you listen to NPR or some stations carry Earth and Sky, little comments about stars and stuff. And at that website it says, historically the Pleiades have served as a calendar to many civilizations. The Greek name Pleiades probably means to sail. And in the ancient Mediterranean world, the day that the Pleiades cluster appeared in the morning sky before sunrise announced the opening of the navigation season. That the storms of winter were pretty well past. Now it was beginning to be safe to travel. Our celebration of Halloween originates from an old Druid rite that coincided with the midnight culmination of the Pleiades cluster. It was believed by the Druids that the veil dividing the living from the dead is at its thinnest when the Pleiades reaches its highest point in the sky at midnight. So if you've ever wondered where Halloween came from, that's the originating, the etymology of that. They also noted that the Zuni of New Mexico call the Pleiades seed stars because the cluster's disappearance in the evening sky every spring to them signaled the beginning of planting season. You didn't have to worry about frost anymore or cold. It was the time to plant. So when the Lord asked him, can you bind the Pleiades, he's not just talking about zodiac and, have you read your astrologer report today? He's talking about something that Job and the people of that world understood and knew, and that there was foundation for that. There was reason for that. Orion, of course, it was known in all civilizations, and no particular reason, but the constellation Orion has been noted in all civilizations. And of course, the bear and his cubs are the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. And the whole point of God referencing these is to ask Job, do you know how to control the stars? If not, how do you suppose you can understand all that I do? It keeps emphasizing that point, that if you're really going to take on God, and you're really going to say, okay, I want to know what you're doing, you've got to have the capacity to understand all of these. And of course, scientists will say, now we do. But if there was a modern day Job going on, the Lord would ask questions that they would have some understanding of, but they wouldn't have an answer to. Bring out the point that you've got to understand a whole lot. Even the scientists will say about the universe, there's a whole lot more that we don't know than what we know. Duh. And that whole point is for God to say, if you're going to take me on, you've got to have the ability to understand all of these things. If you can't understand these, how can you understand how I am working in your life? Job. Question? Comment on that. Just interesting particulars.
Well, I'm just thinking about Job can't control time, which a lot of the astrological things you were talking about designated certain times. So I'm just saying, Job, you can't control time, which is everything.
Sure. Yeah. Can you stop the Pleiades from arising, controlling time, the seasons of the year? Well, if you can do that, Job, then maybe you and I can talk. You just kind of wonder what Job was, the expressions on his face when all this was going on. You just kind of wonder about that. There's another particular section in chapter 40. And in that section, in that chapter, verses 1, really chapter 40, verse 1, through chapter 41, verse 34, that whole section, the Lord talks about three things in that section. He talks about every proud man, and then he talks about two creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. Some commentators will say that, yes. I don't think so, but some commentators will. So after challenging Job's ability to understand the basic natural order of things that he knows, he sees, stars, animals, birds, those types of things, the Lord moves on to address Job's questioning of his justice in the world. Now remember, Job had, in his responses to these three companions, stated that it seemed God didn't balance out justice on the earth, as the wicked seemed to succeed, and he, in particular, being a good man, a righteous man, was suffering. Chapter 7, verse 20 and 21, chapter 9, verse 22 through 24, chapter 21, verses 7 through 9, chapter 27, verse 2, and chapter 31, verses 35 through 37. All of those places is where Job, and probably more, Job utters this complaint. And remember in chapter 31, verses 35 through 37, as Job was talking about his perspective on his life and his suffering, he said, if I had my way, I would put my case in front of God, and he would have to answer me as to why I'm suffering. And the Lord in chapter 41 takes him up on that call. Job's problem wasn't sin. It's very clear. Chapters 1 and 2 make that very clear. But what Job had as a problem, and same problem that we as believers often run into, is being able to bridge the gap of suffering and trusting that God is not against me. How do I understand my suffering and that there's a loving God and he's not against me? If he's not against me, why on earth am I going through what I'm going through? That's essentially what Job was complaining about. It was he couldn't bridge that gap. He couldn't make that leap, if you will. And the Lord is trying to help him to understand that through these. Now in chapter 40, the Lord says to Job, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. And we're going to look at Job's responses a little bit later on. But then in verse 6, the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he tells him, brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Sounds a little bit like Elihu here, doesn't it? Do you have an arm like God's? Can your voice thunder like his? Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor, and clothe yourself in honor and majesty. Unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at every proud man and bring him low. Look at every proud man and humble him. Crush the wicked where they stand. Bury them all in the dust together. Shroud their faces in the grave. Then I myself will admit to you that your own right hand can save you. As obvious as it seems, reading this, the answer is obvious. No, we are not God. But it's often the temptation that we face as believers to claim, to think, say out loud, whisper it, whatever, that God doesn't know what he is doing or isn't being just in what he allows or what he doesn't. And what the Lord is again saying to Job in this is that unless you are me to understand the whole picture and what I set up, you cannot begin to earn the right to question what I do. I think it's very interesting. One of the things in verse 14 of being able to be right with God, being able to stand before him. If you can do everything that he talks about above that, then you have the ability to save yourself. You don't need grace. But how far have we worked down that list of things that we can do so that we can justify ourselves before God? I don't think we've worked down that list at all. I keep looking at it and just wondering, okay, no. So we need something else in order to enable us to stand before God, to save us. It's not our right hand. It's not our ability. God has to provide it for us. Job gave us the key to that back in chapter 1 when he offered the sacrifice. When the blood of an innocent was shed to cover the guilt of the sinner. And we'll celebrate the resurrection, the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus next week as a holiday. But it was that sacrifice that enables each one of us in this room to be right before God. Otherwise, we've got to do all this up here. And if we can't do this, I think we're in trouble. So we need His grace. We need His forgiveness. We need His provision for our salvation. And it was offered to us in Jesus Christ. I think that's just, a wonderful message that comes out of that section. But let's move on from there and look at two animals that God talks about. Behemoth and Leviathan. Now, these creatures were evidently known to Job. They're called Behemoth and Leviathan. And both of these terms are actual transliterations from the Hebrew. They're not translations. Translation just defines what it's saying. These are actual transliterations. It's taking the Hebrew letters and putting them in the English language. So it's really not giving a translation. Now, these words do have meaning. The word behemoth basically means super cow. That's what the word basically means. Beast or super cow is what the word behemoth means. And Leviathan is an interesting word because it actually means serpent, dragon, huge, that's a huge sea creature. And it comes from a root word that they believe actually means to twist. So a twisting, serpentine type animal. So that's what these two words being transliterated from the Hebrew actually mean. And this section of Job, probably more than any other except maybe chapter 1 and 2, produces the most questions about the book of Job, and is also used as an attack on the veracity of the Bible, And we're going to look at a little bit of detail about what the Lord was actually doing here in this. Now, the first creature from chapter 40, verse 15 through 24, this is where we read about this. Verse 15, look at the behemoth, which I made along with you. That's kind of interesting phrase there. And this creature is relatively easy to identify. This of the two is the more easily identified. And as the term basically means beast or cow, most commentators identify this animal as the hippopotamus. That's the most common reference that is made to this animal. Some commentators prefer the elephant, and some say it's an extinct creature, dinosaur, somebody mentioned, or it's just totally mythical. From reading the section, and I'm not going to read the section, you can read it, but just from the reading of the section, the hippopotamus really pretty well agrees with this. And the hippo was known in the Palestine region as far north as Lebanon at one point. So this, we think about hippos today, it's all in Africa. Well, how did Job know about what was down the Nile, down in Sudan, and all this other? Well, thousands of years ago, their range was much greater. They've been killed down to this point. But they have found bones and things like this up as far as Lebanon of the hippopotamus. So it's quite possible that Job had seen this creature, or at least had heard of it from the caravans that he traded with. people who had experienced encountering one of these huge creatures. So, the question is, why did God bring the behemoth to Job's attention? You know, what's the point? And that this animal was powerful and feared very little is well established all through, history. Verse 19 of chapter 40 states that this animal ranks first, or among the mightiest of the animals that God created. And, if you read about the hippopotamus, they have very few natural enemies. The Nile croc, which we'll talk about in a moment, is one, and we are the other. Other than that, they have very few enemies. They're not afraid of much because they're so big and so powerful. But even though it ranks among the mightiest, verse 19 also says that God doesn't have a problem approaching it with his sword. Job, can you? Once again, if you can't handle a hippo, how do you expect to handle me? It's basically what he said. And the Lord is grinding down on Job, indeed. But remember, the Lord is correcting Job for the insult that he gave to God. He didn't sin. It's been made very clear. But Job's suffering didn't fit in with his picture of God. But because God doesn't fit our picture, doesn't give us the right to put our ideas above faith and knowledge of him. Now that gets pretty close to us. Because all of us have in this room a picture of who God is and how he acts and how he does his stuff. And it may all be perfect. However, there's times that things happen in our lives and it just doesn't fit with our picture of God. And the challenge for the believer at that point is, now, do you redraw your picture to be able to include what God is doing? Or do you, like Job, say, you ain't doing right? You ain't treating me right. Kind of like the football player when he, always got down on his knee when he went into and made a touchdown and things like this and broke his leg or something like that in a football game. And the player was heard to say, all I do for you and this is how you reward me. That's a Job statement. That's a Job statement. And the Lord is helping Job to understand God is bigger than your little picture of me. And there's sometimes in our lives that the Lord brings things to us, we have no clue why that happened. I don't know why I had a heart attack. Maybe I had too much money and the doctors needed some of it because they're getting a chunk. They needed a new Mercedes or something, you know what I'm saying? Summer's coming on and they need a beach house. I don't know. Why did I have it? I don't know. I certainly wasn't expecting it. There were no indications that I was going to have it. Basically, the doctor said there wasn't a thing in the world you could do to prevent it. So, fine. Why am I having this? What did I do to deserve this? Could have been one of the statements I made out of that. Because it's been a booger, getting over it. Not as bad as some folks, but it's been a booger to get over. But my challenge as a believer is to fit that into my faith. Was God hacked off at me and said, okay, I'll fix you, thump you in the heart? No. He has his plans. I think I know one. And I learned another one the other day when I was at NC State. One of the co-trainers said, you scared me to death, Billy. And I figured it's time for me to make some changes. If that helps that person live a longer life and a better life because I had a heart attack, amen. So be it. I don't know. I do believe that there is somebody in some situation out there that what I have gone through and am still going through, maybe it's food, you know what I'm saying? Maybe it's I'm going to be able to help because of what I have been through. Not that I'm great and wonderful, none of that. But the Lord is going to be able to use what I've been through if I have enough sense to fit it into my faith so that I can help them fit it into their faith. And this is what God is trying to do. And he's using all these things that Job knows of to help him see. There's a whole lot going on, Job, that I'm involved with. You are not. Are you able to handle all of this? I am. Are you? Well, no. Well, then how do you expect to figure out everything else that I do? And make the comments that you have made about me. See, the Lord heard the insults that Job had made. And so he's kind of drilling down on Job to help him to understand. Job, you didn't sin. This is not because you sinned. But now, you need an attitude check, son. You need to understand, I'm in control. I'm not against you, even though you have assumed I am.
How does that affect what God told Satan about his faithful servant, Job?
Well, and I think that's basically the point of that, because Satan said, if you let me get my hands on him, he'll cuss you to your face. Yeah. And the Lord said, take your best shot. You can't kill him, but take your best shot. And the Lord had confidence in Job. He knew Job wasn't going to do this. The only thing that Job had to correct was his attitude about where God was. And he didn't understand that. But Job was still a righteous man. He was still eschewed evil. He was blameless. He feared God and lived like it. And his problem was understanding, I'm fearing you and living like it, and I got all this stuff happening to me, and I can't fit it into my picture. And the Lord is trying to help Job see that the picture's a lot bigger than what you think it is, Job. You can still trust me. I know what I'm doing. I am with you. I am with you.
Let's not forget he had some friends that was helping him through that.
Say that again?
Let's not forget Job had some friends
Oh, yeah.
that was helping him get through that, but probably didn't do anything but cause division.
Mm-hmm. They certainly frustrated him because they kept saying, you've sinned. And he kept saying, what did I do? You know.
Go ahead and curse God.
Yeah. That's what wives do to you, won't he? Go ahead. Yeah, I know.
See, there's a bitch, right?
But yeah, you know, and this is the thing. In reading Scripture, we try to read Scripture and fit God into our picture. When Scripture may have a greater picture of God, we've got this little picture right here. It's not that you have sinned. No, because we all need to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. But it's when we try to fit God into our little picture and then complain when he doesn't fit, that God says, okay, now, you and I need to talk. You're not understanding correctly here. And that's why he's going through all this, laboriously going through all of this with Job. He's really trying to help him to instill discipline, if you will. Not punishment, but discipline that corrects and instructs and leads to a greater place. Job is going to end up out of this in a much greater place than he was before it ever started. And sometimes we go through things and, you know, well, it'll get better. Oh, yeah, great. Sure. I'll be glad when it starts, you know. But if we will allow God to work through us in that, we can come out in a better place. I will never be what I was before the heart attack. Never. I'll never be that. I'm at least right at 30 pounds lighter, so I ain't, you know, I'm 7/8 the man I used to be, you know what I'm saying? You know. But I will be in a better place, spiritually, as well as physically, if I keep doing what I'm supposed to do, even though I don't feel like it right now. But we allow God to work through us, we will be in a better place. Scripture tells us this. Scripture tells us this. We're going to see it when Job's prosperity returns. We're going to see this play out in his life in chapter 42. And we'll talk about it in that.
So Bill, kind of full circle, he really is addressing the mature Christian.
Yeah.
We will never arrive.
No.
But he's talking to those of us who think we're mature Christians and got it together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we can never see him for who he really is.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong struggle. And
Yeah.
but, you know, how do we do church? You know, the church as we know it today is not scriptural.
Yeah.
There's nothing we do in what we call church today that's scriptural. We're doing the best we can with how we see it. But it is indeed how we see it.
Yeah, because we are human, because of our humanity. Paul said it this way in Corinthians, now we see through a glass darkly. The best we can do is see through a glass darkly. Here's the glass right here. And we're trying to see through it as best as we can and understand it. But because we're human, because we're carnal, we just don't get all that we need. That's why we keep growing, keep getting better and greater knowledge of our Lord, growing in faith, not a sin thing, but it's just growing in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ, continuing to mature, and learning where we have God in a box, and we need to let him out of his box so that he can be who he is to us. And it's not until we get that glorified body and we actually are able to see him face to face that we will really begin to understand what God has done in our lives.
I just punched in because my brain's not working. God's been working with me for 44 years. And he's nowhere near, I'm nowhere near where I'm supposed to be. Thank God he doesn't give up.
He's been working on me for 50, and there's sometimes he wonders, well, how are you ever going to start growing? After 50 years of being a Christian, are you ever going to begin to grow? So no, I am at best a carnal Christian. I am at my best. That's not, I'm not glorifying anything, but that's the best that I am. And I need that grace to cover me. And I need to try to look into that dark window as much as I can to see and understand the best that I can. And they're going to come up here and chase me out of here if I don't let y'all go. So we'll continue this and probably finish up Job next week and maybe get started with the introduction to Esther. And now, Esther, book of Esther.